Okay, good morning. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I am Feng Sheng Hu. I'm the Richard G. Engelson Dean of Arts and Sciences. I'm delighted to welcome you to Graham Chapel for what I'm certain will be a lively discussion today. We're thrilled to welcome back to campus renowned sociologist and relationship expert, Dr. Pepper Schwartz, who happens to be a friend of mine. Today, Pepper will be discussing sex, love, and life with Assistant Vice Provost Adia Harvey Wingfield, the Mary Tileston Hemenway Professor of Arts and Sciences, and an acclaimed researcher and author on racial and gender inequality. As I'm sure you agree, this is an important time for a scholarly conversation about human relationships. Commencement is coming our way. Many of our students will be graduating, leaving campus, and beginning new careers and new relationships. It is also an incredibly uncertain time in the country and in the world. And that is why it's so important to have open conversations like this one about the power of relationships. I know we will be leaving this discussion with Pepper and Adia today, better equipped to navigate the increasingly complex world and society. In arts and sciences, we talk about the value of public scholarship a lot. The idea is that we're translating our scholarly work and its importance to a broader audience. And that's just one of the reasons why I'm so excited to introduce our guest of honor today. Pepper has been a true pioneer in public scholarship, making her research accessible in ways that show the world the impact of social science on everyday life. Dr. Schwartz has a distinguished academic history. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in sociology right here at WashU. Before earning her doctorate from Yale University, at WashU, she graduated magna cum laude and was admitted to mortarboard and Phi Beta Kappa. Much later, she was given the Dean's Distinguished Alumni Award and gave a lecture right here in Graham Chapel. That preceded me, I know that. She has written myriad publications on gender and sexuality, including 2 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Her research was heavily referenced in several important trials on gay rights, including the right to serve openly in the military. She has also appeared as an expert columnist and TV commentator on love and relationships at many, many places. And for the last 11 years, she has been an on-air relationship expert for the reality show Married at First Sight. Pepper has earned national recognition for her work and is the recipient of the American Sociological Association Award for Public Understanding of Sociology. She's a generous supporter of WashU, and we're so grateful that she's with us here today. Leading our conversation with Dr. Schwartz today is sociology professor Adia Harvey Wingfield. Adia's research focuses on racial and gender inequality in the workplace. She has lectured internationally and is award-winning author of more than half a dozen books, including her most recent work, Gray Areas: How the way we work perpetuates racism and what we can do to fix it. Adia has also been at the forefront of a public scholarship initiative in arts and sciences, and we are so proud that Adia now co-directs the university's public scholarship office, migrated from arts and sciences to the university's provost office just recently. Thank you, Adia, for leading the discussion today, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two rock stars of today's show. Pepper and Adia, please come up to the podium.
Hi. Thank you, Dean Hugh, for that great introduction. Pepper, I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk with you here. I think we're going to have a great conversation.
I know we will.
Can you start just by giving us a little bit of background about whether or not there was a defining moment or experience that led you to pursue this field of study in the first place? Is there something in your past, a singular experience that let you know that this was the path that you wanted to pursue?
Well, of course, I was always interested in sexuality, just personally. So there was that. And that's not unimportant in the sense that it was the birthplace of the regeneration of the women's movement and feminism and the idea of taking back the definition of whatever it is who we were and what we could or could not do. So, you know, there's always the cultural and historical milieu that you're in that makes a difference. But I didn't think of it as my career until I went to Yale. And Yale was at that time a completely male institution. So when it announced that it was going to be co-ed, I couldn't imagine how this was going to change the place I had entered. There were very few women at Yale when I went. There were women in the graduate school and in a couple special programs. But it was the kind of situation where you would know pretty much every woman on campus. And I had come there thinking I was going to do a combined program of sociology and law. And I was a budding feminist, so I thought I was going to be a divorce lawyer and make sure that women got a fair deal. But I got drawn into the situation of what sociologists maybe called a naturally occurring experiment of all these women that were going to come to this male campus. And so I and another sociologist named Janet Lever, who I'm still a colleague and friend of, decided to do a study on the first year of women at Yale. And so one of the things that happened there was Philip and Lorna Sorrell were teaching one of the first courses on human sexuality that had been taught on a campus since Kinsey, you know, since that, and Stanford had one as well. And that was it in the United States. There was these two programs. And so because we were studying the undergraduate body, literally and figuratively, I took a job as a TA, as a discussion leader in this course. And I looked at the material that was in the course, and by the way, Sorrells were great. He was a gynecologist, obstetrician, and she was a social worker. They were terrific. But the material they had, when I read it for discussion, got me really upset because most of it was opinion. There was very little research to guide that opinion. And all you were, you know, if something seemed wrong to me, you know, I could say, I don't like that, or I don't think that's right, but how was I gonna answer in any informed academic, intellectual, or responsible way for that matter? So leading that is when I decided to start studying this seriously, because there was so much misinformation, those things, it wasn't funny. That's was the turn in my life, both to look at it through gendered lens and also through an academic dedication to good methodologies and, I hope, good questions.
That's really interesting that it sounds like a lot of this was serendipitous in terms of where you were at this time and this place and being exposed to these questions that were not really answered in a sound research form, but were answered by opinion at that particular time for you.
It's very true. I mean, I think we are, maybe more than we like to admit, a product of the historical and cultural moment we're in. And you can either answer that call or not. But for me, particularly as a woman who wanted to kind of, you know, quite honestly, and at my age, why not be honest, right? Or any age, but particularly now, You know, I wanted a sexual life that I created on my own terms. And there were cultural guidelines that were very restrictive and judgmental and stigmatized. And I thought, no, I'm going to figure out how I can live my life my way. And I needed more information to be able to do that. And I've always felt mission-oriented. It's not just about me. I'm just one person, but I'm not so unique that there isn't a lot of other people struggling with the same questions. And as an academic, I was armed to answer them in a better way than just how I felt about it.
So you mentioned that this happened when you were at Yale, but we know that your BA and your master's degree were here in sociology at WashU. So when you were here at this time, were you thinking at all about these questions about sexuality or intimacy? Were they on your radar? Were they budding in a way that allowed them to take root at Yale, or was it just not really a thing on your mind at all until you got into this environment?
Sex has always been on my mind.
Okay.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, I mean, I was atypical in the sense that, you know, even though I had a boyfriend, a wonderful boyfriend for much of the time I was here, I would say I would have had what was more classically thought of as male sexuality, which is like, this is a drive and I'm going to honor it. But my master's degree was on the socialization of law students, you know, so it had nothing to do with that. But my personal life was at odds with the rules that were set for me. And so, yeah, I felt like, you know, I sort of refused to give into it, but at some cost, you know? And there was things like, you know, I always looked for like a foot on something stable. So, you know, I was always an excellent student. I was president of my sorority. I had a boyfriend. I had things that sort of, you know, ran with the right cultural expectations. And then there was this other world and this other psychological set of mine that was not, you know, a good little girl. And so I certainly was motivated that way during this period of time. But I hadn't thought in a career way about any of this. I just knew I was part of the baby boom generation where we had a comfortable enough economic, and the world seemed, if not our oyster, it seemed like a pathway that hadn't been there before.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes me think about something that I think is common in sociology in some ways, this idea of trying to understand this tension between the individual and the structures that are present, right? Why we may want something or believe something or see something as individuals, but feel unable to attain that because there are these structures in place or these institutions that say, no, you can't do that, that's not what girls and women do, that's not appropriate, that's not okay, right? And trying to figure out where there's a path forward and why those tensions exist in the first place. So that makes me want to ask you questions about, obviously, sexuality, intimacy. How do you define those things? And are your definitions of those things that come out of these, what we would call the sociological imagination and out of your research? How does that shape the way that you understand sociology, intimacy, things like that?
Do we have an hour on that question?
If you want an hour, we will take an hour.
Like, you know, I could speak a lot on each question we're going to talk about. Well, first of all, I'll just say one of my things that really ticks me off. They're still worried, you know, I live in two worlds, my academic one and my TV one. And in TV, they won't talk about sex, they'll talk about intimacy. And I'll say, no, they're talking about sex here, you know, and intimacy is different. You know, sex can be intimate or not. It can be interpersonal or not. Intimacy to me is at the heart of something I care about, which is how do we relate to people in a way that is vulnerable and kind and revelatory and at the deepest levels of who we are capable of being as humans. Intimacy to me is at the core of what we should have in our lives with family, friends, and lovers, partners, husbands, wives. It's getting to the deepest level of who you could be to someone you trust. I mean, intimacy is not guaranteed to us in any way. Relationships are, and perhaps sexuality is more widely dispersed than true intimacy. So when I think of it as a very deep and important topic and something that we owe ourselves at achieving at some point in our life, and many, many points maybe. So that's that category. Now, sexuality to me is part of a physical drive. It's part of a body ability. It's part of our reproductive legacy. It can be anything from the way we look at each other and see each other. Attraction is part of sexuality. It's culturally created in many ways, who we're attracted to, when we're attracted, how we feel about being attracted, how we experience connection in physical ways, but it includes everything from the look to everything we can do with our bodies, and what we think about. It's our mind, it's our fantasy, it's the capacities of our brain and our body. It's a huge subject, and sometimes people narrow it down to, an act. It is so much more than that.
I read a quote once that said that intimacy is when you can completely bare yourself to someone and show them all of the parts of you, the good parts, the ugly parts, the parts that you're ashamed of, and have them react by saying, "You're safe with me." Do you feel like that's a definition that you agree with?
I like it.
Yeah.
And I think, like everything else, it's a spectrum.
Sure.
So if there's a 1 to 10, Likert scale on intimacy, I would say that even within a trusted relationship, it can vary. In the point, it could vary on what you're capable of. And sometimes you find more layers to the onion that you knew that were there. And so you think you're intimate, but then you get intimacy in a different way with a different person, and it's even deeper and more magical than you thought. It can be temporary, it can be false intimacy, but it was real in when it existed at that moment and how you felt about it. So, like everything else, it's way more complex than what we initially conceive of it.
I think when we talk about these questions about intimacy and sexuality, even in the way that you've described, they're defined in ways that I would imagine are very different than historically they may have been when you first started your career, right? Even this discussion about what intimacy is, and certainly your discussion about what sexuality is. I would assume that's not been a fixed construct over the course of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about whether and how you've seen this field evolve over time, and what that's meant for your own research, and how you've had to adapt, or if you've had to adapt to the evolutions that have occurred?
Well, I think in the beginning, it was more movement-oriented. The constraints against women, the definitions of women were pretty much what got me interested in the beginning. Premarital sex was like an issue, still is in many parts of the world. When I'm talking here, I'm thinking culturally about America, but if I think more globally, then it becomes a much more differentiated and situated discussion where, there's still things like honor killings of women, et cetera, that are despicable to think about, despicable acts that one thinks about. But to keep the circumference, local in a way, I think in the beginning it was about what has been said about women and trying to deconstruct that to understand it better and see what structures and preferences and stigmatizations created that and get that information out of there. There were a lot of stuff that was just so basically wrong. Like there was a very big bestseller, something, I can't remember, everything about sex that you would want to know, or some title like that. It said things like if you didn't have your child by 25, it would be injurious to you. And, if you masturbated, it would become a habit that made it impossible for you to enjoy intercourse. And I kept thinking that no woman I know has ever run away with her vibrator, It was just, it was a sense of all these things that were very ideological and biased. So it was like trying to go after the obvious misstatements that were out there, very basic, trying to let women understand their own biology and physical ability. There was nothing, so example, in the medical books of the time that helped you understand what a clitoris was. and literally in the medical books, I mean, maybe the description, but not how it really functioned in life. Masters and Johnson their pivotal work, which now a lot of undergraduates have never heard of, but it was pivotal work, about trying to understand actually how bodies actually worked as opposed to how we described what people described. And there was physical, getting the body all wired up and watching out where the blood went and didn't go, et cetera. I mean, it was pretty basic in the beginning of just trying to do sort of foundational work on how bodies work, how many myths were out there, giving permissions, understanding, trying to get good information in the books, trying to do research. And then what I started to take a look at was also, I've always been I come from a family where there's a lot of sympathy for marginalized people, persecuted people, and so I got very interested in gay and lesbian people and all the terrible mistakes that were made about describing them and the stigmatization of who they were and what they were capable. And so I did a study. I came to my first job with a study in mind after I'd gotten my degree at Yale, comparing, I'm very interested in intimate relationships, so I wanted to see how structures, the sociologist in me, saying, what is marriage? How does it create, this whole library of things we try and do within marriage, and how does that also affect our sexual relationships? And so I did a study comparing married couples who were heterosexual, cohabiting couples, because that's a different kind of structure, heterosexuals, and then gay males and lesbian who were in same-sex relationships. So by comparing them, I could look at both institutional structure, like marriage or non-marriage. They didn't have it for gay men and lesbians at that point. But I could also look at how gender affected relationships and how people put together all these different ways when they couldn't use both a culturally and biologically assigned difference. And that was with 12,000 people, and we got a big National Science Foundation grant for it to take a look at these things that have been now percolating in my brain through graduate school, but now I had time to really try to tease apart both the intellectual and ultimately important issues of looking at a group that I thought had been sort of demonized, was demonized, and getting real empirical data about both their relationships and our speaking for myself, the kinds of structures and the kinds of expectations I had been oriented to because of, my sexuality and my life. I wanted to open up the windows and information on so many other ways of relating to other person and creating a life that had practical things to do in it. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the growth of my thinking in the area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I wonder, when you think about kind of over the course of time, what I feel like I hear you saying is that there's been some change in terms of the types of stereotypes and assumptions and expectations that you were fighting back against and confronting when you first started your work in this field. But I guess I think that a lot of those preconceptions and messages are still present in many ways, right? I mean, I guess I just don't feel like we've gotten to a place where we've moved past completely a lot of the things that you're describing, right? And we see a lot of evidence of that, I think, in the way that women's behavior in some ways gets constructed, in the lack of knowledge and information people have about women's biology and our basic reproductive rights. Do you feel as if we're kind of on this path towards moving forward, even if we haven't passed all of this stuff by, or do you feel like these are kind of repurposed iterations of the same issues that you observed? And just full disclosure, we're off script now. I just am curious about this. So I just would like to know what you think about that.
I think knowledge and practice is like this.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like this. It's
right.
not like that.
Right.
And this whole, if we want to go into transgender
right.
stuff, when I went to the UW, I was actually on a board that decided which people could get the surgery to bring their identity and their bodies more into congruence. And so I learned a lot about that in a very small window before it became a national dialogue, right? About just the individual and trying to understand who they were and how we could help them in their journey through life. And so that has become problematized and politicized in a way that I'm sort of gobsmacked about, really. And then, as it turns out, there are many forces, political forces, sociological forces, that fight against what I would see as, from my point of view, from my values, the breadth of choices and definitions of what a woman can and should be. There's, like for everything that goes this way, there's always backlashes that go that way. So we could talk a lot about that, but this whole thing about trad women and the reproductive focus of this present political push against, what I consider, in a broad sense, the liberation, I hope, of both sexes to be the kind of man, woman, or identity of non-binary, if that's where you're going. I love a life that gives choices to everyone. And when they become politicized and ideologized, as an academic, we're the enemies of blanket ideology. We're the, as sociologists, we try and understand how the world that we're investigating works, and we tend to understand many parallel silos of life. And that's a conception I like. I want people to be able to find their happiness in their way, as long as it doesn't abridge the next person's vision of how they want to live their life. Not all things that are consensual are always good for the individual choices, or, we don't all make decisions in wise ways. We learn, hopefully, from them. But the ideology of what people should be impressed on large groups of people who have different, goals, different values, different urges, that scares me. As an academic, you want to find out what's real, and you want to find out, and because we use such important variables like race and age and ethnicity and culture, how can we think of a life that would suit everyone, right? So, yeah, all of that.
Yeah. So I put you on the spot a little bit with this question because, again, it was just one that came to me. But I want to ask you, given the things that we're talking about, how you navigate what I assume might be an issue of getting your research taken seriously, right? We're talking about very sensitive topics. These are things that affect everybody. But these are also things that historically have, I think, been maybe pushed under the rug or silenced, or you've even talked about kind of lack of information or accurate information being available as a motivating factor for getting into this type of work. Do you deal with challenges in getting people to take your work seriously and give it the respect that it deserves? And if you do deal with those challenges, what strategies do you use? How do you get people to take this seriously and not giggle or titter or be embarrassed or anything like that?
Got another hour? So when I got a grant from the National Science Foundation, and also from NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, we called it the management of conjugal and quasi-conjugal couples, because we knew that if we said anything gay or lesbian, they'd get all hot and bothered. But that didn't work. They still got all hot and bothered. I got denounced on the floor of Congress for discussing these topics. And so that took us seriously in ways that, we didn't really want. We got denounced in the National Enquirer for, justifying gay people's relationships. So I've had that. So that was serious. We were taken seriously in ways I didn't like. And there used to be something called, and I'll tell you about this story. It's actually Proxmire. He was a pretty good senator in some ways, but he loved making fun of academia. And he gave something called the Golden Fleece Award, which meant you were fleecing the citizens by funding out of these national funds, which are, of course, now heavily endangered now. But and then that was unusual. And if he gave you the Golden Fleece Award, that meant you were cheating the government by getting money to study what you were studying. And I'd watched that happen to a friend of mine who studied love, and they gave her the Golden Fleece Award for that, Elaine Walster. And I watched what happened to her. All the crazies came out. She got death threats. And she was at the University of Wisconsin. I mean, it really screwed up her life. She needed guards because of this. And I heard that we were going to get the Golden Fleece Award from Proxmire. So I got smart. I don't know why I was this smart. I called up both my senators to their office, and I said, we've heard about this. And the way we heard about it was somebody in one of these offices tipped us off this was going to happen. Long story short, we talked to our senators, we got their assistance, and they went to Proxmire and said, don't you touch our people. And we didn't get it. So I would say, what do? You fight. You fight that way. When it comes to giggling at sex, I mean, okay, that's part of the deal. But you try and explain in ways that I do, both in my books and as a person that's about why we're talking about the center, one of the moving parts of everyone's life that is really important, and give examples of why it's important. I used to teach huge classes, 500 people, some of them, and they weren't giggling, not at the end. I mean, we can talk seriously about this stuff, but also we can make jokes and have fun with it because, we don't always have to be earnest in everything we say, but I think it becomes very apparent that this is really an important topic, just like love is an important topic and never should have gotten that terrible award that made light of something so important, so essential in people's lives.
Right. On that topic, I think part of what I hear you saying is that maybe some aspect of why your work is so impactful and reaches people is because it does connect with something that's very core and central to the human experience, which is this question of connection and intimacy and just basic contact with other people. But we also know that as of late, in the US at least, there's been this loneliness epidemic and this isolation that's become more of a consistent pattern and an increasing problem, so much so that the Surgeon General in 2023 actually released a report called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, and talked about the impact that has on individuals and on societal health. Can you talk about ways from your research that you think we can foster more connections and have more of a stronger, more connected society, more connected lives, given how impactful and how central this is to our human experience? What do we do about this? How do we address this epidemic of loneliness in ways that bring us together instead of dividing us further?
I wonder if it's a real epidemic of loneliness, or that now we have so much more connectedness that we know how lonely we are. And it's a lot of things where they rise up to public knowledge, and then we think it's an epidemic, but it's because we have the tools to understand now what's going on. I think loneliness is been increased by COVID. I think that put people in little cells of existence that challenged them and made them see in some ways where they were connected and where they weren't. A lot of people were unconnected in the most important ways, and when they got rid of the trivial ways, they realized how alone they were. So the question of connecting people in ways that matter is a really serious issue. And I think it needs to work at both the macro and micro level. The macro level is now, it's mass media. And I believe that mass media has a role to play. It could talk about it. Things both have, almost anything we talk about is both half empty and half full,
Sure.
Right? So I believe that we can be connected by AI in ways that help us relate, and that's a whole big topic, but I'll just leave it there for a moment. I believe that we can feel somewhat more connected through Facebook and all of these things that can also, they help us reach out, even if they're sometimes not enough substitute for face-to-face stuff. When it comes to face-to-face stuff, you have to get small. You have to touch people, be with people. Churches can do that. Communities can do that. I think one of the basic things that draws people to churches and synagogues and mosques is touch, is community, is feeling part of something. I think they have great roles to play in them. Far larger in some ways to me than just the spiritual task that they go to, because they're places people are physically present with each other. And I think we do have to think about how we create at a university. You can be lonely in a university. You can be lonely in your dorm room. You could be lonely in your marriage. I mean, you can be lonely in a lot of ways that if you're not brought to recognize it and say, do I have the few people that would, as they use this example, but I think it's true, that you could call in the middle of the night and they'd say, yeah, I'm here for you. Don't worry, I'm here. And who you've told enough things to. And if you've, and I think particularly with young people in this 18 to 21, 24, 25 thing, there's a lot of loneliness there, even though you are in crowds. And so I can understand that, and universities figure a way to break people down into small groups where they can meet, where they can understand, who they're talking to. In a lot of corporate stuff, they have icebreakers and things like that. We need that. We're lonely and we're awkward as individuals. I mean, however we look on the outside. And so we need help getting through the interior us and the awkwardness we have in trying to reach out of that. And I think it's really important all through the life cycle. I see it a lot as people age. I have a professorship in my name that I'm kind of proud of at the University of Minnesota on sexuality and aging, but it should be almost intimacy in aging, that full range of how people who maybe weren't lonely at one point in their life are lonely now as they lose their closer friends or as they get somewhat disabled and don't have the mobility they used to. I think intimacy and its combating loneliness is a really important thing. And again, I take that out of the sexualization of intimacy there, but being known, being able to have someone at your back, understanding you have people who have known you well and you can express those inner fears and those thoughts and those worries as well as your happiness. You need people who are happy for you. I've always said one of the tests of friendship is if something great happens to you, are someone jealous or are they thrilled for you? You should have people who are thrilled for you.
Great. So I want to ask you some audience-submitted questions now.
Okay.
I would like to ask you from the audience what factors you believe contribute most to long-lasting love.
I think, and this has changed over time, I think respect. I think if you don't respect the other person, then it's corrosive. I think character, having the person you're with that leads to respect, that you feel that they act in ways that you could admire, which isn't to say that you have to have a perfect person or that they always act in the way you would admire or always respect them, but at the core, is that the way you feel? Mm-hmm. Because, attraction and a lot of other things are really important, but the attraction will go away if that respect isn't there. Mm-hmm. So I often think that, hey, that's why I think, I'm not in favor of divorce, but I'm not against it. Because I think we're different people often, at different stages of our life. We're capable of different things, right? Sure. And when you're really young, if there's a strong enough attraction, you don't want to see all that bothersome stuff about character, integrity. You just want them. So, we make mistakes that are perfectly okay for the time, but not necessarily great for the long run. But that's what I think for love. I think love rises from admiration and respect and having gone through a lot and accepting certain things that aren't so great about the other person and being able to still have that core value of who they are and the way they act in the world. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. So maybe building on that, maybe not. If you were to offer one piece of advice that you think everybody should hear, what would that advice be?
Well, it's a combination of to thine own self be true. Shakespeare said it a long time ago. But also, I think there should be a comma to thine own self be true and to also feel good about the way you feel you act towards others and in the world. I think you have to have self-respect as well as respect for others. And and we all have different ways of earning that self-respect, but I think if you live enough of your dreams and you go after what would make you feel great about your life, and then you act towards people in a way you feel like, I am a really good person, I'm not perfect, but I'm a good person. I think those two things, if you do those, you're gonna have a fulfilled life.
Great. And again, maybe building on what you just said, maybe not, the question that I want to close with I think is very apropos. Should we still believe in love at first sight?
No. I'd like to say yes, because when it works out, you see this person and they're your person, and then you get together and we remember the stories where it works. My mother used to tell me, you know, your father walked through the door and I knew he was the one. Would I have lived in that marriage? No. Was it a good choice for her? I think on balance it was. But there's also all those stories where, you know, I saw her and she was the one and maybe not so much, you know, over time. But I do think attraction's important. I do think there's something chemical that happens between people, and I think it's great to have it there because you're gonna have to depend on that some of the times when it's rocky, you know, just that feeling that you get for somebody. But I don't think that's love at first sight. I think it's attraction at first sight. I think it's important, but it shouldn't be mistaken for love.
Great, okay. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your thoughts. This was so interesting. I think at this point we can turn over to audience Q&A.
Hello, thank you for your time today. I had a question about, I guess, a lot of the rise of popularity around dating and reality TV. I know you yourself are a love expert on Married at First Sight, which I admit I have seen with my mother, but along with...
You can admit that.
Well, I love reality TV, so I'm passionate about it, but with shows like Love Island, Love is Blind, Temptation Island, the list goes on, Naked Attraction, how do you feel these shows influence and impact the lives of those that are watching it, and how are our constructions of what relationships can and should look like? How do those change because of these shows and popular media in general, I guess?
Well, I'm going to put my TV head on now. It's like my academic and my TV self are here, and there's a bridge. I'm going to go to the bridge. First of all, I wouldn't put all those shows in the same category. I really think the show I do is really quite different. I think Love is Blind is different too. Full knowledge, it's also produced by the same production company I'm in, and some of those are the ones that are and are not. But some of those, like Fantasy Island, are fantasy. They pick beautiful men and women and, you know, let them have at it. And that's about it. It's fun, you know, but it's not what I think is important. And it's not something I would be involved in. What I like about Married at First Sight, and for those of you who haven't seen it, shame on you. No, seriously though, no. It's about literally people who are desperate to be married and haven't been able to do it. So that's our denominator. It's a special denominator, but not a rare one. They have us find a partner for them. We find 5 couples that we match out of maybe thousands who apply per city. They're in a city. And we do a lot of work on how we match them. And then they meet at the altar and get legally married. And then we're with them for the next 3 months or so, trying to support those marriages and help them learn how to be in an intimate relationship. And a lot of times it's pushing a ball uphill. Other times, they met, it just works out. We have, I think, like about 20% of these people end up staying married for at least 5 years or more, some of them from the beginning of the show. And there's 16 kids that I feel I slightly helped happen. people who watch that show learn a lot about marriage. And a lot of couples watch it together and talk about what they do or what they don't, feeling superior or, oh my God, that's how we look, kind of. I think people can learn from it. I have learned a lot from it as an academic as well as, you know, a person who's giving advice on the show. You know, the whole experience has been educational for me. So I think it's like anything else that's in this mass media world we live in. Where are their sources from? Who's doing it? Is it worthy or is it not? It's like, where do you get your medical advice on the web? Do you get good sources, or, you know, are you reading Goop and believing it? That's probably a little gratuitous, but what I'm saying is that, you know, you have to be an educated consumer of whatever you look at and understand what that particular source is trying to do or not trying to do. So there's reality TV, you know, about fishermen, you know, in the high seas that I think is real, you know, and then there's lots of stuff like fantasy this and that, or Honeymoon Island, or whatever it is, that is just pure entertainment, I think. And like anything else, you have to be a intelligent observer of what you want to take from it. For us, I think it gives a mirror to people that is useful to them, both for the people who participate, but especially for the millions of people that watch it. For me, I feel really good about what we do. It's all honest. People will say, oh, that's edited or that's edited. We sometimes edit a lot that would be too overwhelming. I mean, you know, we film these people hundreds of hours, and some editor has to decide, you know, what tells the reality of it. But I don't think they ever distort the reality, not the one I work in. Are some of these things totally manufactured? You bet. And for Married at First Sight is franchised all over the world, but the local franchises of them are generally like what we are, but some of them are not. The one in Australia is purely manufactured. So, you know, it's watcher beware, and be an intelligent watcher, and you can get really good things out of some of it, and very misleading things out of it. You know, that's just the world we live in. Back there.
Hello, thank you for this discussion. The phrase lesbian bed death came out of your study. And I'd like to know how you've engaged with the community discourse around that phrase.
That's going to be in my tombstone, isn't it? Pepper Schwartz, she studied lesbian bed death. I swear to you, I don't remember writing or saying this, but maybe I did. And it probably came out of the American Couple Study, where at that time, published in 1983, so it's historically in a moment, the lesbians in our study had very little sex. They started out with less, and they got to none over time. And so it is possible that I thought about how do we avoid lesbian deadbed, you know? So that has been brought to me by members of gay and lesbian communities, and all I can do is say historically, this is what we found. I don't believe it's like that anymore, actually, but I haven't studied it, you know, right now in this period of time. I think as the permissions of sexuality and freedom and sexual breadth have affected women in let's say, in this general population of America and Western Europe and a lot of places like that, that it's affected lesbians too. I mean, so my guess and my hope is that that was just a fact I discovered at a certain period of time, and wanted to and I thought about it, why? Okay, more interesting, why? And here's two things I've thought about that they're at the theoretical level. One is I thought, women give each other so much more affection that, and they do. I mean, we found that as well, hugging, kissing, stroking, in ways that is less common in other kinds of couples, that maybe some of that creates less need for genital sexuality. And then also I think women have often higher standards of what are the circumstances for when they feel fully open to all kinds of, more advanced areas of needing more intimacy for the relationship, for it to advance into more than, the hugging, kissing, stroking kind of thing, but into more genital kinds of experiences that, when you're pissed off, I know this is gonna be just a stereotype, but I think my experience in both, in studying thousands of people's sex and emotional lives is that men can operate their sexuality with a lower grade of how they're feeling in general. And for women, it has to meet a certain personal standard of how you're feeling about your partner to have sex at the genital level. And for men, like, I've been pissed off, but let's have sex anyhow, So I'm gonna put it there, but I haven't studied that in the depth that I would feel like I could prove that. So there you are. Anybody else? Oh, and back there. Oh, there's back there first. I'm sorry.
Hi. So I've noticed like modern dating is really focused on dating apps now, which has kind of like gamified it a lot. So I was just curious on what your thoughts are on how like dating apps have affected attraction and intimacy in the modern day.
Well, I think it's changed over time. I think that's because people are waiting longer to get involved with somebody seriously. And so they use it for two reasons. One is like, I want to have sex tonight, I'll find somebody to do it with. Or I want aim-inhibited dating. Like, yeah, I want to go out, get to know somebody, but I've got a life to live and I don't want it to become committed. I want to go to medical school, or I want to join the Marines, or whatever it is, I'm not ready to be in something that will hamper my future plans. Pardon me. So that's on the web. And then it's also the people who are like, I've gone further in my life and I don't know anyone appropriate, and I'm ready to be committed. Those two worlds clash together in the same pool and causes a lot of frustration and sadness when you're mixed motivations for being there. And so that's what you hear, these stories of frustration for people who are getting involved with somebody who's in one of these silos that are going in different directions. The older you get, in general, particularly I'd say from about 28 to 35, somewhere in there, people really are motivated to find somebody. And so they need the tools and they need the way of getting themselves out there, that they meet the right people to talk to and get involved with. It's a tough world because it misses all those signals that you can't get until you're with somebody, facing them and finding out who's really there. So what I found in Married at First Sight, because we're seeing people who've been through that ringer, is a lot of people who feel depressed and burnt out at 25 because of these experiences. And, look, you've got to be pretty desperate to come to our show. Really. I mean, this is a big risk, right? But people get there because they're part of the committed group. They want their person, and they're having trouble finding through all these other kinds of separate silo people, but who may not look like that when you first start, right? So the good news is there's ways to find other people. The bad news is what I've laid out in front of you. But the fact is that there's at least places to reach out. Remember, this used to be the personals where you just get a little written ad and that was all you'd know. And people have met that way because they were determined. What I would say is I think people can find the person they love this way, but they're going to have to develop a hard outer shell and an open inner one. You have to still believe and you can find someone to love, but you're going to have to withstand those experiences that are not what you should experience, not what you deserve to experience, but they're out there and you're going to have to survive them. But I do believe that, you know, it's like, why go online? Well, it's like, why go fishing with a fish finder? You have to go where the fish are, or you can put your line in an empty pool for a very long time. So I'm saying, well, okay, this is your fish finder, that's where the people are, and you're just going to have to figure out how to withstand it to find each other, because people do.
So we have time for one final question.
Oh, there was someone over here. Yeah, no. Oh, she did ask your question, okay. Is that it? Oh, here.
You know, every year we hear about the happiest people in the world, you know, who they are, what community they are in, what country they're in. These are the happiest people in the world. But I have to tell you, the last few years, deep in my heart, I have felt so saddened by those women in Afghanistan. Who are they? How are they able to live now? How are their children able to live now? Just all of the time they had to become themselves and to be truly women of value, both to themselves and to their country and to the world for what they showed themselves to be capable of doing. Where are they now? How do they survive in the oppression that's now been put upon them? And then what happens in that country over time when they were open and now they're closed?
Well, I've thought about this, of course. A lot of those women are living in hell. I mean, there's no nice way to put it. We can either say that we gave them 20 years of freedom, or we'd say we set them up for, you know, despair, depending on where you want to look at it. What I would say for us is, as many things as we need to conquer in our own country, and there's plenty that we probably could all agree on, we should have a deep feeling of gratitude that we can exist in women in many parts of the world, and including this one, where we can be fully realized humans. And there are parts of the world, like Afghanistan, where women, other kinds of minorities by color, by ethnicity. I have a good friend who's Uyghur Chinese. They're a highly discriminated group in China. There's just many parts of the world where freedom, individuality, options, choice, they're just not possible. And that's true for men as well in some of those categories. Just looking at it to both the sad parts of both male and female existence where you don't get a free life. And while ours is attacked and circumscribed in some ways, nothing compared to what it is like to the kind of place you're talking about. It's hard to know how to help because sometimes help can put people in more danger and more despair. So there's no easy thing, and the only place I can take it back to a positive aspect is to be grateful for the lives we're being entitled to live, even with its challenges and shortcomings.
Please join me in thanking again Pepper Schwartz for her remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this thought-provoking and insightful conversation. So let's put our hands together and give our speakers another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
As you can tell, at WashU, we are just truly so fortunate to have such prominent and trailblazing sociologists among our faculty, our students, and our alumni. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.